There are fundamentally three reasons, in my opinion, why we have experienced inflation and why it is a threat. The first, and by far the most important, is in order to pay for government spending. The government doesn't do it, you do it. I do it. We, the citizen, do it. We tell the people in Washington, we tell our congressmen and our senators and our representatives, we want you to spend more money on us. But we don't want you to put any taxes on us. We don't want you to levy taxes. We want you to spend more, but we don't want you to tax more. There's no way you can do the one without the other. The real tax on the American people is what government spends. If government spends if the federal government spends $450 billion and only raises $400 billion in taxes, who do you suppose who pays that other $50 billion? Do you suppose the tooth fairy does? You pay it, and I pay it. And one of the ways we pay it is by the tax which we call inflation. Inflation is, from this point of view, a form of taxation. If government spends more than it takes in the form of things that are called taxes, it has to meet the difference, either by printing money or by borrowing from the public at large. Printing money is a very attractive device because inflation, from the point of view of a person sitting in Congress or in the Senate, is a wonderful tax. He doesn't have to vote for it. Have you ever known of a congressman who got up and said, I vote to impose a tax in the form of inflation of 10% next year? No siree. Inflation is a tax which is imposed without representation and which nobody has to vote for. And of course, it's a marvelous tax from the point of view of a congressman trying to meet the demands of his constituents for more spending. Inflation, its taxation, yields tax revenue in three different ways. It yields it directly. We think of these pieces of paper we carry in our pocket as money, but it would be just as accurate to think of those as receipts for the taxes you've paid. If you pay the government $100 directly in taxes, the government sends you back a receipt, you paid us $100 in taxes. Well, now the beauty of printing money is that the receipt is right straight with the payment of taxes. What you're getting there is not money, but tax receipts. And from the point of view of the government, those pieces of paper, and I'm exaggerating, of course, they're not really pieces of paper, that's only the primitive way of doing it. In our modern age, we do it in a more sophisticated way through using a bookkeeper's pen or a computer instead of having to turn the printing press. It's in the form called deposits, one of the most misleading terms in the human language. When I think of a deposit, I think I put something there and there it is. But you know, when you go into a bank and deposit money, the people behind the counter run as fast as they can to another part of the bank to pay it out over another counter in the form of loans. It's not deposited there. And similarly, when the government sends a check, it may, in effect, be doing the equivalent of printing paper money. I won't go into the details of that process. You will get the right answer if you think of it strictly as printing paper money. So when the government gets revenue from inflation directly in the form of these pieces of paper, it can go out and spend without having gotten taxes from anybody. But it also gets revenue in two other ways. In the first place, with the kind of tax system we have, inflation raises other kinds of taxes without anybody having to vote for it. You might think that if prices go up by 10% and your income goes up by 10%, you're in the same position as you were before. But you're not. You're pushed up into higher brackets of the income tax. And on the average, if prices go up 10% and your income goes up 10%, your taxes will go up 15%. So that the Congress, again, is in a marvelous position. It can vote to lower tax rates when, in fact, taxes are going up. There's a lot of talk in the papers these days and the news these days about the president proposing a tax cut next year. That's pure fiction. Nobody is proposing a tax cut. These much publicized tax cuts of the past few years have not been tax cuts at all. Inflation has raised taxes, and the so-called tax cuts has given back a small part of that to the taxpayer. But the actual taxes the taxpayers have paid have gone up as a result of the automatic effects of inflation. In the third place, the government gets revenue from inflation by repudiating its debt. Many people keep worrying about the government debt. That's not something you should worry about, because the government debt today is smaller, that is the announced government debt, the open and above board government debt, bonds outstanding and the like, is smaller as a percentage of the national income than it was 20, 30 years ago. How can that happen? Every year we have deficits. How can the debt be going down? Because those are not real deficits. They are deficits that have been financed by inflation. Anybody who has bought government securities in the past 10 years has paid the government for the privilege of lending to it. Anybody who has bought a long-term government bond and then redeemed it has gotten back an amount of money which has less purchasing power, less ability to buy goods and services than the sum he initially paid for the bond. And to add insult to injury, he's had to pay taxes on what they call interest. And as a result, the debt has gone down in meaningful terms. So that inflation is a marvelous resource for a government in all three of these ways. That, as I think, has been the main reason throughout history, not only now, but going back for thousands of years. You had a great inflation during the time of the Roman Empire, when Diocletian was emperor. He did it in a different way. He did it by taking nice, good, full-bodied silver coins and replacing the silver by an alloy that was worthless until there was less and less silver, until one of the history books talks about the ancient denarius, which used to be a full-bodied silver coin, finally having become, in Diocletian's era, little more than a copper coin with a wash of silver. Now, I happened to come across that quotation the same year in which the American Treasury was replacing our full-bodied silver coin by a copper coin with not even a wash of silver, only of nickel. History does repeat itself. So that's been always throughout history a major reason why you have had creation of money to finance government expenditure.